Welcome into this week's Degrees of Science. There's been a lot of national news about bird flu. So today we're talking about an expert on this and learn more about this flu and kind of some of the possible impacts. Today we're talking with Dr. Bhadelia. She is the founding director of the Center of Emerging Infectious Diseases at Boston University. So Dr. Bhadelia, I guess for people that don't know, what exactly is H5N1 bird flu?
Brady, H5N1 is an avian influenza type of influenza A that we've known about for a couple of decades now, but in the last few years it's been behaving slightly differently and infecting now a greater range of mammalian species that now raises a concern it could potentially adapt better to infect humans.
So how does it get the H5N1? I know swine flu was H1N1. What does that technically mean, on those flus?
Yeah, the H refers to hemagglutinin and the N refers to neuraminidase. Both of those are proteins that are they're on the surface of the virus itself and facilitate the ability of the virus to attach to the airway of the animal is trying to infect and get into the cells of the respiratory system to cause the infection. So H5N1 refers to the particular type, if you will, of those proteins that are on this particular virus.
You were talking, this has been around for a while and changing some. What do we still need to learn about this particular flu to help protect us?
Yeah, Brady, over the last couple of decades, the World Health Organization's recorded almost 1,000 infections with this particular genotype of H5N1 of avian influenza, and about half of those have led to deaths. The concern is, now you're seeing that this virus has gotten good at infecting mammalian species, including dairy cows, which is moving it closer to human beings and potentially raising the risk of humans to get infected from animals. So even though there's no evidence that there's sustained human-to-human transmission, we're seeing an increased number of human infections because they're coming in touch with infected animals. What we don't know is why it's behaving the way it is, why it's getting so much better at affecting all of this mammalian species. And the other is, traditionally, this could lead to pretty severe disease. And so far, at least with the exception of the case in Louisiana, we've seen mostly mild infections with H5N1 here in the United States.
So you were talking about being around infected animals. So what do farmers, ranchers, or just people that may own, say, chicken or cattle or something like that, what should they do to try to prepare themselves or watch for with something like this?
Yeah, majority of the people who are at high risk for this are those who might be around infected animals. So you mentioned dairy farm workers, commercial poultry workers have been at risk and have been infected. But this virus has affected nearly 133 million birds, wild bird, commercial, backyard flocks. And this case in Louisiana shows that, people who may have backyard flocks or may come in contact with wild birds, or the transmission between domestic and wild birds may also be at risk and should be aware of that risk. The federal government has asked, and state governments and agencies have worked on making commercial farm workers safe by introducing personal protective equipment, by testing animals that may be infected, by looking for symptoms in workers who may be sick. But if you're someone who has a backyard flock, or if you have bird feeders or other animals in your backyard, the best advice I can give is that if you see a sick or dead animal or a bird, but not to handle that corpse yourself, but rather call the health department or the wildlife agency in your state to tackle that disease. The other is contaminating those spaces where a dead animal may be, using personal protective equipment so that you're not exposed to the virus.
So for those of us that don't have a flock or around cattle, is there any worry about eating, say, chicken or eggs or beef or drinking milk or anything like that?
Well, the good news is H5N1 is pretty easy to kill as long as it goes through the right processing. So pasteurized milk, which is most of the milk in most of our supermarkets, is very safe to drink and has again been shown with H5N1 to work in terms of killing the virus. If you are someone who has access to or consumes raw milk, there is a risk of transmission that theoretically that exists, not just for H5N1, but for other bacterial infections, including Mycobacterium bovis and other bacterial infections that cause gastrointestinal illness. Eggs, most of the eggs that are on market are very low risk of being infected because they go through the surveillance. And any farms that have been affected by H5N1, generally those eggs are not in circulation and those animals are actually culled beforehand. So the risk of encountering an egg or other products that may be infected on the market is low. However, to keep that risk even lower, you just have to cook it. Keep anything that you might be consuming to 165 Fahrenheit internal temperature, and if you cook it to that, you are safe.
Okay, so you were talking about having a flock in your backyard or something, but what about people that may have a bird feeder or bird bath? Do you have to worry about potential wild birds that could come around that carry this?
I have to say, I'm someone who tends to, be on the cautious side of things, and particularly if you're in a state where there have been known outbreaks of H5N1, I would be one who would probably suggest that you don't keep a bird feeder out, particularly because we don't know how widespread it is. You've heard me talk about the fact that this infection is noted in almost 50 states among many of the birds, and so the safest thing probably is maybe not put out that bird feeder this year.
So if it's something like this that's spreading and we're still learning about, the word that gets everyone scared is pandemic. Is this something that could build into something bigger than what it is right now?
Yeah, Brady, is there a risk that H5N1 could become a pandemic? Yes. Is it going to? And when is it going to? Both very good questions we don't have an answer for. I hope that's never, but what's happening is that the more sporadic infections, these infections from animals into humans that we're seeing, the bigger the runway is for this virus to potentially adapt to humans and to potentially be able to transmit between humans or to evade some of our existing medications, antiviral medications such as Tamiflu.
Well, Dr. Bhadelia, I think it's really great information. Learned a lot. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Thanks for having me.